Classic Restos is proudly brought to you by Shannons Insurance, where you can be a member of the Shannons Club. Pace Farm, the enjoyable egg. Hare and Forbes Machinery House. And Gun Lake Quarries.
From Muswellbrook to Tamworth and now on to Koygle, New South Wales, it's time to see a restored truck owned by one of the most respected ambassadors in the trucking business on this week's episode of Classic Restos.
Brown Hurley stand unsurpassed in the business of selling and maintaining trucks. Brown Hurley have a long-standing tradition of growing with their customers, and since 1947 have come a long way from a small garage and a mechanic shop in a quiet country town. Good business revolves around good communication, being there for your customers and their needs. Of course, this forms friendships and lifetime associations. Brown Hurley are good at this. In 1947, the first sale was made. It was a HG42 Oliver Cletrac. 1965 went down in the history books as well, when their first Kenworth was sold. This truck was featured at the 2019 Kenworth Classic. In 2016, the Brown Hurley Group celebrated 70 years. And in 2018, Brown Hurley received the National Training Excellence Award. It would take more than an episode of Classic Restos to showcase the magnificent accolades that Brown Hurley stand for. Here is one man integral in the operation of making this happen.
Right, this is a 1978 Kenworth K124 that we sold new to people by the name of Carlsberg and Johansson in Kingaroy. And I was after a 76-inch cab over to restore, preferably with torsion bar suspension, because in another 30 years' time no one will ever know what torsion bar suspension was. But anyway, after going to auctions in Perth and all over the place, looking at them, everyone who looked at it had been altered. So I decided I'd do this one up, which has got 6-rod suspension. Well, it's got a 400 Cummins engine, and it's got 15-speed Road Ranger, and SSHDs, 44,000 Rockwell rear axles on 6-rod suspension. It's got the Garrison power steering, like the later model ones had power steering in the steering box, but this is actually on the tie rod, the Garrison power steering, and that was a big step forward from not having power steering. So actually Bruce got me onto it, and I got it off a fella by the name of Jason Goodsby from up at Jimboomba, which is only a couple of hours from here. And it looked pretty good, pretty straight, but when the boys started to pull it apart, there was a lot more sins than what I thought would be there, as normally happens when you're in restorations. The back end was totally pulled out because there was some rust between the chassis rail and the inserts. So it came out, the cab came off it, the engine came out of it. There was some oil leaks in the engine, and they did them while it was out, so it was really sitting there, a pair of chassis rails with no back end and a front axle. Yeah, well, we sold it new in 1978 to Carlsberg and Johansson, and it worked all its life pulling grain, and I'd say that they probably pulled it off the road about 2013, 2015, and of course, because it's got the 6-rod suspension, they'd put a bit of pudding on it, I'd say.
One telltale sign with this truck as to how much work it has done is that the grips here above the wheel, the teeth have worn off from boot abrasion over some 35 years of guys getting in and out of the cab.
Well, I've got to say, it's quite an honour to be with the man himself, JJ, Jim Hurley. How are you, Jim?
I'm fine, thanks Fletch. Lovely to have you here at Koygle.
Thank you very much. Just filming some of the dealership, the retail area out the front, the presentation of the trucks lined up. It's the sort of place here at Koygle where you drive past and you want to come in.
Yeah, well, we try and create that atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the premises here, of course, there's a shed. Well, need we say more? We're inside that shed now. There's a few restored vehicles here. What have we got here, Jim?
Well, this one here is a C500 Kenworth that's done 30 years logging. One of our great customers, Restos, they got into timber about the same time as White Ants. And when I traded it in, they gave me all the logging gear to go with it. And then we got a 58 Landrover. We were appointed Landrover and Volkswagen dealers in 54, so we sold a heap of them. We got them. We got the first Kenworth we ever sold.
And that featured in the 2019 Kenworth Classic, and sitting up on the hill there, and boy, it looked like a masterpiece, that truck. It really is. It's a very special bit of gear, isn't it?
Yeah, it means a lot to us to have it back again. And then we got an Oliver Cletrac. That was the first thing that the company ever sold. And a White Superpower WC22 White was the first truck ever sold. We got a 1922 solid tyred White that my grandfather bought when he sold his bullock team.
How does it make you feel to know that your grandfather's truck is here?
Yeah, well, that's really good, but it's probably the reason why we're in trucks. Like if he hadn't sold his bullock team and bought a truck, we may never have gone down that path.
I wonder what he thought going from the bullock team to the truck, that transition of moving from the animal to the machine.
Yeah, he was pretty innovative. He was prepared to have a go. You know, he bought after the Whites, he bought some international crawler tractors, and when they were in the bush, no, he was a goer. Great old fella.
The machinery from the 20s, was it fairly reliable back in the time?
Well, the problem was that most of the trucks at the time that were converted utilities or something, and they were going nowhere, and people persisted with horse teams and whatever. But once trucks like this White came on the market that were designed to do heavy work, it sort of changed the whole industry.
Yeah. You've also sold quite a few tractors in your time too.
Yes, yeah, well, after the war, when the business was just getting going, they sold everything that the farmer needed, tractors, irrigation plants, milking machines, whatever the need was there for, that's what we sold.
I was 16 when I first saw her. Loved her utterly. She was so sweet, so perfect, still is. She's got a whopping great two-stroke engine under that gorgeous aerodynamic body. Insurance? Well, Shannons, of course.
No one knows your passion like Shannons. That's why we offer special limited usage rates and even club plate cover. So call Shannons on 13 46 46. Shannons, insurance for motoring enthusiasts.
Hare & Forbes Machinery House has been family owned and operated for over 85 years, and it's easy to see why. Planning on welding? Look at these welding tables and clamps, air compressors and different air tools, sandblasting cabinets, through to spray guns. Everyone is welcome at Machinery House. There are competitive freight rates around Australia, and you can buy online at machineryhouse.com.au. So remember, Hare & Forbes has the range.
Well, Brown and Hurley's story started in 1946 when my dad and Alan Brown, they'd linked up as mates during their time in the army, and when they were discharged, they'd made a decision to go into business. And the early days were very hard. They had bought a bike shop and had a workshop up the back. They used to do a few repairs. Anyway, they weren't going anywhere, and they decided one of them would go out and work on wages to support the business. And a fellow came in, wanted to buy a farm tractor, so they got this Oliver Cletrac 42, And then another fella wanted a white that was a log truck, and they got £50 commission out of one and £75 commission out of the other one, and that sort of got them thinking, well, we've got to get into selling stuff. So that's where the sales part of it evolved from. Alan Brown was a very good engineer, could do anything with his hands, build anything. So he sort of looked after the service side of the business, and my dad got into the sales side of it. So they probably instilled into us that customer service is the key to business, and our company mission statement is principles before profit, and we've always stuck to that. We've got a very loyal workforce. We've got one fellow who's been with us over 40 years, quite 2 or 3, 30 years, and quite a lot between 20 and 30 years that have worked for us. And we've always tried to promote the business as a family, a big family, and everyone's involved, which is nice. I started in 1958 as an apprentice motor mechanic under Alan Brown, and as I said, he was a great engineer, and he taught me good principles of vehicles and machinery, and then I went into sales, and I love trucks. No matter how old I've got, I still get a kick out of getting an order for a truck. I did a bit of truck driving in the early days when we were selling Leylands. I used to go over of a Saturday and service these sand trucks, and then I'd do a couple of loads of mineral sand from Woodburn back to Kingscliff. And I really enjoyed that, but I never went into long distance and never had any passion for that. Well, this truck behind me is a Leyland Super Hippo. This one's a 1959 model. The first one we sold was in 1957 to a fellow by the name of Robbie Arnold from Uki, who was a logger. And we got into Leylands. We were previously selling whites, and whites had persisted with petrol engines, and my dad could see that diesels were the way of the future. So that's how we started to sell Leylands. We sold 548 Leylands from 57 through till 68. And they were a really good truck for the time, you know, they were well built, but unfortunately they brought out some models later on that couldn't work in Australian conditions, and they failed, and that's when we sort of parted company and went on with Kenworth. That's 150 horsepower, that truck, at 680 cubic inch engine, and for the time that was big horsepower, you know. The Leyland trucks were really good trucks. They had a really good engine, cab was good, rear axles were good, but their gearbox wasn't so flash. They had a 5-speed gear main box and a 2-speed auxiliary box, and a lot of them that we took the main box and the auxiliary box out and fitted NR-Mac gearboxes to them, and that made a really good truck out of them. Well, this truck behind me, it was bought by Indiana Station across the Plenty Highway in Northern Territory, and I'd looked at quite a few to try and get one, and they were all too past restoration. Anyway, I got this one off a fella, Bob Addison, down at Beaufort in Victoria. He got a heap of stuff down there. He didn't exactly give it to me, but anyway, it was a good base to start from. So I did quite a lot of time on cattle in the Northern Territory, and a lot of it would have been property work on Indiana Station. shifting cattle around the properties. I think it's about 1 million acres or something. So they, most of its time would have been spent on property, shifting from paddocks to paddocks and mustering. And this truck here, that's what you call a super hippo. They had a big radiator and a big bonnet. They were fine. There was a cab over, it was a hippo. They had a smaller radiator, but the super hippos and bonneted trucks were by far more reliable and handled the conditions better. And that's really where they went downhill. They bought out this ergomatic cab, they called it, and it was very pretty looking, but they put a bigger windscreen, a smaller radiator, and that really wasn't a good option, and that's where they started to come undone.
When I was a kid, I loved cars.
I've been a motoring enthusiast all my life.
My life is hot rods, designing them, building them, and racing.
Hand-built with a stainless steel roof.
It won the Monte Carlo Rally 4 times. Like Dad, I've always been a Ford man.
In '71, this was the fastest 4-door car in the world.
Insurance? Shannons, of course.
Got a classic truck? Got to be insured with Shannons. Why not pick up the phone and give Shannons a call for a quote and a chat regarding the policy that suits you best on 134646. And don't forget too, the Shannons Club is awaiting you. For more information, visit shannons.com.au.
Well, in 1922, he sold his bullock team and bought a solid tired white truck the same as this, and he was logging down there. And he came into a wet time and he went down to Gunnedah carting wheat into the rail, and he followed the wheat harvester all the way up to Warwick, and then he was heading back to Coffs and came down through Koygle, and he got this work here, and people with the sawmill at Rosebery, they were bringing their timber into the railhead. The railhead ended at Koygle at that stage, on a horse team, and he loaded back, and he was back that afternoon for another load, where it was a 3-day trip with their horse team. So he got the job of carting for all the local sawmills into the railhead, and then when they extended the railway line through to Brisbane, he got the job of carting the steel for the railway bridges. So he'd cart the steel for the railway bridges up, and he'd bring timber back. And then a fellow that he got on pretty well with in the railway said to him, well, you're doing all this dangerous hard work. So they gave him the job of carting all the rivets and whatever. So anyway, then he got in touch with my grandmother and said that he'd found this good work at Koygle, that she better come up. So she and the kids came up, and that's how we come to be settled in Koygle. Righto, Fletch, well, this is a WC22 white, and after the war there was a lot of pent-up demand for timber in Sydney for housing, and there were a lot of sawmills around our local area, and people were logging with blitzers and GMCs and ex-army equipment, and this fella by the name Bill Barrett, he wanted something better, and he came in, and my dad got him a white truck, similar to this. It was a bit earlier than this, but it had full air pressure brakes and had really good gearing, got a 5-speed main box and 3-speed auxiliary box, and they are really a great step forward from the blitzers and GMCs and things they were using at the time. The engine is a petrol white engine, and I'll tell you a story about that. When I was apprentice motor mechanic, they used to blow manifold gaskets all the time, and of an afternoon, stinking hot afternoon, in had come this thing, been working all day with the exhaust nearly white hot, and you had to put a new manifold gasket on it. But their engine was pretty reliable, and then they had a 5-speed main box and 2-speed auxiliary box, Spicer auxiliary box. There was a lot of white sold. Interstate wasn't all that big at that time, you know. It sort of was probably later on in around the late 50s, early 60s that interstate transport got going a bit. Most of the trucking those days was local. Like these trucks would do probably 12,000 mile a year, and trucks like that C500 that we looked at there earlier, the Grensels, they're probably doing 200,000 kilometres a year. But the mill was there and the timber was there, so it was only a short altogether. The rail carted practically all the long distance stuff because the trucks hadn't been reliable and of course the roads were really horrible. Probably in the mid-60s that interstate trucking got going a bit and overnight transport and whatever. But the roads were a lot of the problem, you know. The Pacific Highway, there was about 5 ferries between Brisbane and Sydney they had to negotiate, and so it was a pretty slow trip.
So, Jim, how did that feel to take Fraser's truck out?
Oh yeah, she's a bit rugged on the old bones these days, but did the job. They're very good operators, Fraser's, good trucks, yeah.
Interesting how it works with the computer, keeping track of the maintenance schedules, you know, exactly where they're up to with the truck.
Yeah, well, every one they trade in, you get a full printout from day one they've had it, so that also helps sell them.
Having a regular maintenance plan, that's got to be a plus.
Yeah, and of course they're on that maintenance system where they get the extra loading and whatever.
Yeah. Which ties in with your mechanical section here at Brown Hurley as well. Jim, tell us a little bit about what's happening over the back there.
Yeah, well, we've got a big workshop staff and also smash repair staff, and of course that's where the restoration's done. They do the restos. But the insurance companies like us because we do the whole lot.
How many staff you got working down the back, Jim?
42 here at total, and overall we employ 420 over all the branches.
There's a lot going on down there at the moment.
Yeah, they're always busy in the workshop here.
Good on you, Jim. All right, now I want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for the invitation to Koygle and becoming an episode of Classic Restos. Jim, it's been wonderful working with you, and it's great to catch up with you again. You stand for so much for the trucking fraternity. You're very admired by many, many people out there in the industry, and all I can say on the behalf is congratulations, well done with keeping up your tradition.
I think that's a bit of a build-up for an old bush fella, Fletch. Yeah. But thank you for coming to Koygle.
I could have saved myself 40 seconds.
Really? No, I appreciate you coming up, and I'm glad that I run into you at the Kenworth Classic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also a big thanks to Bruce Gunther as well, who has a lot to do with the Kenworth Classic, and keep an eye out for that year to year because that's just one tremendous event. I don't think you'll ever see more Kenworths in one location at any time.
That is for sure, and I'll have two new ones that weren't there last time down there this time, so looking forward to going down that. We had a great time last year, really enjoyed it.
Jim, on that note, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure, thank you.
Okay, Fletch, thanks for coming to Koygle.
You're welcome, thanks mate.
Well, I hope that you have really enjoyed this week's special episode of Classic Restos, featuring the man himself, Jim Hurley, from Brown Hurley here in Koygle, northern New South Wales. Such a prominent person within the trucking fraternity. Active involvement with the Hall of Fame Museum at Alice Springs, the list goes on. As I say at the end of every episode of Classic Restos, no matter where you're watching the show from, until next week, please ride and drive safe. I'm Fletch, and I thank you very much for watching.
You can like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Classic Restos TV and watch catch-up episodes at shannons.com.au. Classic Restos is proudly brought to you by Shannons Insurance, where you can be a member of the Shannons Club. Pace Farm, the enjoyable egg. Hare and Forbes Machinery House. And Gun Lake Quarries.